Good morning, everyone. This is Annalyn Bergen. It's about 9 a.m. We're going to start this meeting off. And we'd like to thank you for joining us for our final workshop. We really appreciate your participation. I will be one of your hosts along with Annika McDonald. And we're going to start this off with an icebreaker so that we can give some people time to join in. So this is going to be a little Family Feud style, but instead of saying out your answers, go ahead and write it in chat box and we'll just say it out loud. All right, so let's begin. Top 5 answers, just write it in the chat. You're given about 30 seconds. All right, let's see. Let me see if I can put up the timer. 30 seconds. All right, first question, or first one. Name one thing you always have in your pantry.
Oh, that's a good one. I would say cereal. Cereal's always in my pantry, Annalyn.
Rice is always in mine. I love rice, breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Yeah, and I would say rice also.
Rice
Flour.
and cookies. I have cookies, an abundance of cookies.
We have. Here we have pasta. Holly says pasta and nuts here.
Oh, there you go.
I agree.
There's my timer.
Emily, yes.
Annika,
Humans have good chocolate.
What are your top 5, Annika?
Peanut butter, cereal, chips also. Canned tomatoes. I always have canned tomatoes and tuna.
Okay, so top 5 answers: beans, rice, potatoes, onions, and flour.
Oh.
Hey. All right.
So we live in a boring world.
Next question. What are the top reasons, top 5 answers only, write in the chat, you're given 30 seconds. What are the top reasons for being late for work? And go. Let's see, Annika, what excuse have you given Emily for being late for work?
I don't get excuse. I'm truthful. I like Beth's answer. Kids, I would agree with. Oh, and Brittany too. Kids. I can't complain about traffic because I live 7 minutes from the office. I love that.
I think I've said that once before.
Santiago says traffic, and Jonathan says kids.
Yeah. So the top 5 answers: traffic is number 1, and then hit snooze many times, car trouble, bad weather, and family obligations. All right. Next one. Name a food that frequently goes bad before you get a chance to eat it. Top 5 answers, write in the chat. You're given 30 seconds.
I agree with Brittany. The bananas.
Mine's always been avocado. I can never eat all of it. Like, I always get Costco size, so.
Yeah, I agree with the strawberries and the spinach too over here in the chat box, and lettuce. Bananas for sure. I mean, there's a point where you either like them slightly green, or once they're spotty, they're just banana bread.
No, you know what I do? I cut them up and I freeze them for smoothies.
That's smart. Yeah, that's what someone else chatted there in the chat box. I freeze them for banana bread, so
yeah,
not very healthy about the end result.
There's eggplant. I don't buy eggplant that often.
Mixed lettuce, sour cream.
Yeah, lettuce definitely.
Mushrooms, Emily. That's funny. I'm sure they get a little interesting in the fridge.
Hey, Annika, did you hear about Mushroom? He's a fun guy.
Fun guy.
Fun guy. Get it? Okay.
I get it.
All right, moving on. Next question. Name an important number people often memorize. Top 5 answers, write it in the chat, 30 seconds.
Oh, this is good. Definitely the social security number and the phone number. 911, that's a good one, Ryan. Credit card number. Props to you, Amy. I don't remember mine.
Luke, is that your birthday? Debit pin. That's a
pin.
really good one. Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Employee number. Way to go, Tom. Combination number for your bike and storage.
I have to email HR for my employee number.
Oh, I love that. Sandra's reply was my husband's birthday. Good one, Kevin. Anniversary. I've actually been working on, I have 2 kids. I've been working on memorizing my 2 kids' social security numbers. I know my husband's and I know mine, but theirs have been a little bit of a challenge for me.
Yeah. I know my husband's for sure. I was forced to memorize mine in the 6th grade. For some reason, my teacher told us he would put our social and our grade. So if you know your social, you'll know your grade. And I don't think that was really good because that's PII. He pretty much showed everybody social security. But I guess it would be random numbers if you didn't know the name associated to it. But it forced us.
It's a really interesting form of enforcement.
All right, top 5 answers. Phone number, social security number, driver's license, debit card number, and bank routing number. I've memorized 2 of the 5. All right, last question. Name something at home that people run out. Oh, well, did I do that? No, I did. Okay, name something at home that people run out of. Top 5 answers. Write it in the chat. You have about 30 seconds. Go. So name something at home.
I like that. TP. The most recent crisis, TP was something we were all afraid of running out of, I think. Eggs, milk. Yes. Bandwidth. I like that, Tom.
That's good. I did run out of it, like especially earlier today.
Sanitizer wipes, yes, and it's hard to get a hold of those now. They're like a treasured commodity now.
Yeah.
I like that, John. The patience, yes.
Things I hate running out of, like deodorant, when you're like, oh no.
I get paranoid about running out of laundry detergent because I'm like just watching the clothes pile up in my house. I'm like, I can't run out of detergent.
All right, so let's just wrap this up. It would be top 5 is milk, toilet paper, bread, eggs, and hand soap. That just concludes all of our icebreaker. Thank you all for participating. I think we should have latecomers come in already. Annika, would you like to, provide directions? And that'll be all. Thank you for participating and have a great workshop, everyone.
Absolutely. Thanks, Annalyn. So I want to welcome everyone to today's Clean Buildings workshop. This is our last one for rulemaking. My name is Annika McDonald. I am a part of the Clean Buildings team within the Energy Division at the Department of Commerce. I want to notify you that we are recording today's workshop. We will post today's presentation and the recording on our Clean Buildings website. For those of you who have joined by phone, please email buildings@commerce.wa.gov with your contact details so that we have record of your participation. At this point, there is no option to unmute your phone and ask questions. If you would like to have the option to participate, we ask that you log into the workshop via your computer or using the WebEx app on your smartphone. We will otherwise unmute you during the question and answer time. So throughout today's workshop, we want to hear your feedback and answer your questions. So please submit your questions or comments into the group chat box. Annalyn will be reading those off at different points in time. Please don't send your questions to the person presenting. Annalyn will be monitoring the chat and notify the speaker when questions arise. So once again, thank you so much for participating in today's workshop. I'm going to hand it over to Emily Salzberg, our Clean Buildings Manager.
Thank you, Annika. Can everybody hear me okay?
Sure can. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you. Well, you two are hard act to follow. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is actually our 15th rulemaking workshop for Washington State's Clean Building Standard. This workshop today represents the hard work of so many people. I want to thank all of you that have participated to date and for the comments that you've provided. We've completed additional outreach recently on this rulemaking effort, and hopefully we have a few new people on the line today. So thanks for joining us. And I want to thank the Commerce staff, SBW, and the 2050 Institute who have worked so hard to get us to this point. Chuck, can we slide over to the PowerPoint presentation? And let's slide 2. All right, Commerce's core mission is to strengthen communities. Next slide. So we just want to take a brief moment to reflect on why we're here today. So buildings-related emissions are the state's fastest growing source of greenhouse gases, and they account for 27% of the carbon pollution in Washington. Investing in energy efficiency is the fastest, cheapest way to cut carbon emissions and other harmful pollution. As a result, the legislature passed House Bill 1257 just over a year ago, which requires Commerce to establish an energy performance standard for existing large commercial buildings. Next slide. The Clean Buildings Law requires that we use ASHRAE Standard 100 as the reference standard and modified to meet the needs and conditions in Washington State. All covered commercial buildings need to benchmark, complete an energy management plan, and an O&M plan. Those buildings exceeding the energy use intensity targets by building type or that don't have one also need to complete an audit and implementation of measures. Next slide. So the rulemaking process was kicked off in November of this last year. We hosted a number of workshops to increase awareness of Standard 100. We talked about building investment criteria. We talked about the methodology to determine energy use intensity means by building type. We got really helpful input from you all on your concerns and things to consider with implementation of this law. In the winter, we started releasing draft rule language that modified Standard 100 to align with our state law and conditions here in Washington. We've continued these workshops remotely this spring. Next slide. So we've received an incredible amount of thoughtful comments from you all. These comments are posted on our website and are organized by workshop. All of your comments have been read and carefully considered. We want to thank you for being willing to share your ideas, your input, and your preferences. Next slide. So this is just a quick reminder about our Clean Buildings webpage on Commerce's website. This is your go-to for all current information. You can sign up to receive updates on our activity. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chuck Murray and Luke Howard.
Hello, folks. Let me get back to our agenda to start with so you can understand the flow of business today. We are going to basically give an overview of the work to date by presenting a consolidated draft to Standard 100, which includes most everything that will go into the rule. That's a big chunk of our work. I'm going to do that with a couple of different documents you'll see posted on the website. We've posted our proposed targets separately from a July 9th draft of Standard 100. Those are both on the website. We also posted a paper by the 2050 Institute talks about target setting relative to the averages that were arrived at by SBW. That work was done at our request. The the comments we're going to discuss mostly today are the ones that have been incorporated in the standard. We will have additional summary responses to comments that didn't make it in. We didn't quite get that tuned up and ready to post today, but we'll try and get that out there next week. It's just a table format where responses to yes or no, we adopted an amendment. With that, I think I'm ready to get started on review of Standard 100. As we review this, because of time constraints, I'm not gonna talk about everything that we did here. We have tried very hard to mark all our new edits, both in the margin and by making new edits in red rather than blue. Blue indicates edits we've made in previous presentations. Sometimes we're modifying something we did earlier, but generally speaking, we've tried to mark this up in a way that people can tell what's new, what we changed, so that they can see whether or not their ideas were adopted, whether or not we got the language right. Any other critical review folks care to give us. I am going to skip to one subject independent of the standard. Somebody has their speaker on. Can you mute it, please? Somebody has their speaker on. Can you mute it, please? All right. How's that? All right. We're back. All right. I'm going to begin, though, by working outside of the standard itself. It's a standalone set of amendments that were made to the standard to cover more recently built buildings and their energy target. Now, just to remind folks, our legislation says Commerce may select lower targets for more recently constructed buildings to reflect modern building codes. There's a within the context of the 2050 paper we posted, there's a chart of the progress towards new construction savings. I might as well I'm juggling a lot here, but I think I can handle it. Not open. We'll check here. I thought I opened that one. Here it is. I'm going to skip ahead on this to the chart. What you see here is progress towards meeting our state energy code. Find this in the 50 paper. An evaluation on our 2018 code, which shows 31% reduction since code, which was already producing better buildings than you might imagine from the wide vintage of buildings in our building stock. There wasn't an evaluation in 2015, but the trajectory is pretty much as graphed, our target bars there. So we can expect in 2015 about a 25% reduction in the commercial sector. Once again, compared to our so part of the basis for decisions around target setting with respect to new construction. So the addition to the standard, first point is defining more recently built buildings. We've defined it as any building where the application permit date is July 1, 2016 or later. This aligns with the implementation date for the 2015 codes. And so that's our definition of a more recently built building that would be impacted by this new set of rules. We've added a definition for retro commissioning because we're providing a retro commissioning approach rather than an energy audit and improve approach. Targets in section 4.3.2. Whatever it is arrived at, let's see. Well, first of all, the first section here in 4.3.2 refers you to 7.2.1 target calculations. And it basically says that that's the route you need to go in order to your target. It'll be different for these building types. There are two sections within the standard, one for buildings that meet the energy target and one's for buildings that don't meet the energy target. These types of buildings that meet it just have to show they're operating less than target. The big change is in what do you do if you have a newer building that does not meet the target? Basically, what we've constructed here is an option in doing the Section 8 and Section 9 audit and improve. This is a detail of a retro commissioning option or recommissioning option. Now, I want to remind the folks on the phone, all new buildings for some time have required metering by the state energy code. So these should all be metered buildings. In fact, I forget the implementation date, but that can include submetering for this set of buildings, you know, by HVAC, lighting, etc. So these buildings should all be able to compliance against the target. The other thing is that our energy codes have had the feature of requiring commission probably since 2009, if I'm not mistaken, probably earlier. Certainly by 2015, when this kicks in, the building will commissioning plan, commissioning report. Now that report is focused on a new construction. So that plan does need to be in order to make it appropriate for recommissioning process. One other thing I've aligned the commissioning, you know, what is called the qualified commissioning agent within the standard requirements of the water energy code for consistency. And I've carried those rules into the standard. So basically, the approach here is that folks re-engage with a qualified commissioning authority. That person creates a commissioning process based on the existing commissioning plan and purposes it as a recommissioning plan. Step 2, you adopt the commissioning requirements of the state energy code. The state energy code has some exceptions based on size of equipment. You know, small systems with lots and lots of small equipment. Well, it's even, you have to add up all the small pieces. So systems with smaller equipment are exempt. I don't think that impacts many buildings, 50,000 square feet or over. I could be wrong about that. So I inserted section 2. This should be 3. We'll have to edit that. All deficiencies found during the commissioning process shall be resolved, corrections, and retesting. Out of the energy code, recommissioning would reestablish the building in its best operating configuration. Building owners may omit capital expenditures identified by the commissioning process that are not cost effective as documented using procedures in normative Annex X. Commissioning doesn't usually include large capital project suggestions, particularly not for new buildings. I expect that to be a rarely used piece here. However, it's allowable should folks choose to do it. And finally, the recommissioning report has to be incorporated in the energy management plan. You know, it's probably a fairly substantial attachment that gets added in the building management documents that are required to maintain as part of section 5 of the standard. So that's the overview. I do see one chat question about ASHRAE standard for commissioning. It is referenced in the first paragraph you see here. David has, well, moderator, let's talk about this for a minute.
Okay, so Holly asked, did you know that there is an ASHRAE standard for existing building commissioning? This should be used as a standard.
All right, I'll take that under advisement.
It's and Holly added it's ASHRAE GPC 1.2.
Right. So we'll consider that. We do want to continue to make this with the state energy code. The guideline basically tells folks how to pursue a commissioning process. I do like standards, but the standard here I've adopted is the state energy code. We'll have a look at that. Commissioning about this, and they never brought up this particular standard. So, all right, any more? I saw somebody raise their hand. Do you see them there? Holly says guidelines.
I don't see any raised hands at the moment.
Okay.
So yes, Holly did say you are referencing Guide 0, which mainly is for new construction.
All right. Well, we're glad comments. Thank you. All right. Few other notes. What's your target? How to determine an energy target for these buildings?
Sorry, Chuck. Before you start on that, Jeff asks, how do additions and remodels factor into this section?
I think it remains an option for additions. I don't know. I haven't considered remodels, and I'm not going to jump out and say anything, but that would be a reasonable public comment. You know, remodels, you're not, scope of remodels is kind of a big trigger there. Now, folks would rather recommission than do energy audit and improvement on a part of their building. That I think we can certainly have a serious consideration. Any comments on that? So, targets. Based on progress of the energy code being about 25% since 2006. In fact, the standard is based on picking up the worst performing buildings in their class. We are taking the approach that we're simply going to deduct 15% from whatever the established target is through the standard process. Once a building has calculated their target, their new construction target will be 15% less than that. We'll just incorporate that deduction within our standard forms, and it's pretty easy piece of math to do at the end. I think that's, you know, that's all we've proposed for these targets. We think they're not too difficult, and we think we provided for these buildings by not requiring them to go all the way through the you know, the full energy audit and improvement process. Now, buildings, I did forget to mention one thing. This only requires new buildings that are in that let's see, that that exceed the 15% lower target, but do not exceed the target, the primary target. So if a newer building has energy use so high that it exceeds the base target, well, then the exception does not apply. So that's basically built into this sentence here. If folks have any comments on that, let us know. Finally, in recognition that it takes some time for a new building to be occupied, tuned up, have a year of energy management, we have created an exception for buildings built, well, buildings who obtain the permit no less than 3 years prior to the compliance date. I think that should be no more now that I read it. Another correction I should make. So the point here is that if it's occupancy permit is issued within 3 years of the compliance date, we get to apply for exception, and they'll need to show compliance in the next compliance term. I have a note here from Amy Wheelis.
Amy asks, so if your building type target is 10, you're building your new, I'm sorry, the chat move. So if your building type target is 10, your new building target is 8.5. If you are between 8.5 and 10, you do commissioning. If you exceed 10, you go through the rest of the process.
That's correct as written here. That's what we're proposing.
Okay. Holly makes a correction that the ASHRAE guide is 0.2-2015 commissioning process for existing systems and assemblies. That's for her correction to what she suggested earlier for new construction.
I think I referenced guideline 0, so we'll figure out the difference between 0 and 0.2. All right, now all this work is incorporated in the standard. I just thought it was useful to go through it here independent of the standard. So once again, I'm not going to stop on every little thing here, but I am going to highlight a few bits as we walk through, just to help orient folks on the sorts of changes we made. So when they do, well, they've already heard some of our comments on the changes. First, in response to a proposal put in by universities, we've added a number of campus definitions as well as district heating and cooling systems. They want to be able to work on their district heating and cooling systems as a principal efficiency measure for saving energy in their buildings. It does not, as written, discount any of the building efficiency they'll have to do eventually, but it does allow them to stage things in a way that makes sense to them. We thought that was an appropriate proposal, and you'll see that in a number of sections as we move here. Complex. This standard applies to buildings or complexes. We have narrowed the definition to complexes interconnected by conditioned spaces. That means, you know, if a school has two separate buildings that are connected by an open walkway, that is not a complex. But if they have two buildings that are connected by heated connection, they would be covered by the law. So that's a somewhat important definition when it comes to calculating the building area for compliance. Here's more recently built buildings. We've already gone over that. I'm going to slow down a little here because I think it takes a minute for everyone's screen to catch up. So we had a comment related to professional qualifications. PSE put in a comment that they thought the qualified person could adopt many of the professional attributes that were adopted for the Seattle tune-up program. I've included most of them. I may have modified the language just slightly. but you'll see some additional professional qualifications qualified for this particular profession. Here, certified commissioning professional, it's copied right out of the Energy Code definition. The ANSI standard is administered by a whole bunch of commissioning organizations. It's not unique to one particular association. So I think it captures a good bunch of what we had before below, but mostly I've done it to make sure we have alignment with our state energy code. I have added, this is off of the somewhat influenced by the Seattle tune-up program. I've added some required years of professional experience to some of these professions. When you look at the certifications, say for the commissioning person, you need some hours and some things under your belt before you can qualify. I think having some professional experience in energy auditing is important as well. I want folks to remember these are the team leads that need these qualifications. They will obviously have some folks to do some of the work that helps them out, but we do want to make sure the team leads have experience. Now, compared to Seattle, I only here. Seattle would have had 7 combined training and education. Folks, comment on that if value that you think is reasonable and you can justify.
Chuck, do you want to?
Yeah, I get distracted by the chat. I just want to answer.
Do you want me to take? Okay, let's go to the chat box.
Sure.
Okay. So Ted suggests there should be a definition for comprehensive energy metering, since that will determine whether a building can use an EUI target for compliance or must follow the audit path. You had a comment in the draft version of section 5 of what that meant, but it should be formally defined in the standard.
We'll get to that. I've approached by referencing section 5.2, which you'll see it when we get there. Thanks for the reminder. I didn't I deleted reference. All right.
Okay.
Looking for important stuff.
We have another one regarding professional engineers with Oregon or Idaho registration would not be qualified as currently written, yet there is little difference in competence or experience compared to having a Washington registration. Can this be taken into account somehow?
Well, okay. Please send us a written comment on this. I'm just say yes. I think our engineering community and our licensing department might differ from what my opinion would be. So written comment and see what other folks.
Yes, please send all formal comments to buildings@commerce.wal.gov. And we'll put that in the chat shortly. Tom says, Chuck, what does the relationship need to be between the qualified professional and the contractors doing the work? Can a qualified utility person set up work for the building's contractors?
I don't think there would be anything in the way of the utility, doing work in a building or setting up work in a building. I think the hierarchy flows from what's defined as the end down kind of, they get to decide, what their team looks like. Obviously you can hire contractors to do work. I think authorizing a utility to do work would be fine. So I don't think there's any problem with, who's doing some of the work. You do have to make sure they meet the qualifications required by the standard is all.
All right, that's all we have for now.
Okay. We previously had some rules that on administration. Well, let's see. No, that's later. Let me talk first. All right. Here's the answer to your question, how we handled not energy targets. Is with this new paragraph under buildings with energy targets, establishes 2 criteria that have to meet in order to be a building with a target. And one is that you have to develop a target in compliance with 782, and you have to provide energy use data as specified by 5.2. Now, what that does is it leaves a sort of awkward bits moving forward, simply by saying what a building with an energy target is here. Here's where the section on more recently built buildings lives. Buildings with that because of the code requirement. They'll fit in a particular section. Administrative requirements. Once again, I was saying that a whole bunch of pasted into this section. Those move to Annex Z, and this administrative section was deleted altogether, and that reference included. We added need to update basically what's a table of contents to Annex Z. So folks, before they read the get Annex Z, they'll see that this is all the stuff they have to do. It'll see some of their options for compliance. Pointer to the details that, quite frankly, I put in the forward that I recommend folks look at Annex Z before they dive into the standard. I've deleted this alternate targets, not to be adopted. You'll see sections not to be adopted marked throughout. That's in a lot of the informative annexes aren't required, and to some extent they're contrary to our rules. And so I want to know, folks, that we didn't adopt those. Exception to buildings smaller than 5,000 square feet. We got a lot of comments about all the references to buildings smaller than 5,000 square feet. My inclination was to leave it in there, knowing that people were smart enough to figure that that wasn't them, but I've deleted it after receiving great encouragement throughout the standard. All the thresholds below 50 square feet were deleted or changed. 5.1.2.1 was the section that directed folks to create an energy accounting system, because we are requiring people to use Energy Star portfolio managers, the energy accounting system. We simply have changed the flavor. I've added, let's see, requirement to section 5 for buildings that don't have measured net energy consumption data. Fully ask them to include in their energy management plan a plan to meet this section by the next compliance period. It's not a requirement that anybody install meters or do it, but I certainly think a strong suggestion that they want to pursue that, and for them to think through that problem as part of energy management planning is a prudent thing to do. All right.
Chuck,
Yes.
before we go further, Amy would like to wants to know if you want to talk about 4.3.3.3.
Okay. Can you unmute Amy? See what her question is.
Yeah, you have a question here around the 75% of energy projected, and a question of, do we need to change this? I didn't know if you wanted to raise those kinds of questions now, or.
Well, that's one of the old questions that I have. Let's see what the date on this was. Oh, it's not highlighting. We did receive some comments on this. I'm actually, I haven't edited it. I left it alone. You know, it seems like you're falling short. You did all the work. You had all the measures installed and required. Your energy auditor told you you're going to get 10 units of energy savings, but you verify only 75% of those savings through your end use metering. Are you done again, or do you have to go loop back around and do some more measures? I did not change this. I didn't want to increase the stringency based on essentially bad work from an energy auditor. So I'm simply proposing to leave it alone unless, once again, folks have strong comment on that. It is about not wanting to send people back in that loop if they in good faith installed the measures recommended by their auditor. All right. I received a comment from the city of Seattle about electric vehicle charging. And the way I handled it, they had a fairly, well, they had a kind of detailed exception for electric vehicles. I just call that exported energy. I essentially say that you charge your vehicle in your building drives away, that's exported energy. So I simply put vehicle in this box where you count for your exported energy. Now we're going to have to be able to accommodate some revised calculations outside of Portfolio Manager. In order to do that, I don't think PM handles that sort of thing, but it's certainly allowed with this edit. This 5.1.2.1.4 is simply moved. It existed in previous edits. We haven't, I don't think we received any comments on it. Here we are adopting Energy Star Portfolio Manager. Once again, Energy Star Portfolio Manager rather than all the text on how to account for energy use. Am I going too fast? Are people's screens refreshing quickly enough?
It's good for me, Chuck.
Okay. If anybody thinks I'm going too fast, let me know. I'm trying to get through this. Energy conversion factors. Previous edits, we said you use the Energy Star Portfolio Manager conversion factors unless they don't have one. And City of Seattle said, all the years we've been doing this, that's never happened. So I've simply deleted those tables. So that's section 4 and 5. I'll take a anybody has any comments at this time? Okay, we're going to keep moving. We're starting with section 6, operations and maintenance. In a previous edition, we allowed utility or local government programs to create an equivalent or better O&M standard and use that as a substitute for essentially Annex L. City of Seattle says, well, what if the city has a more stringent standard in the utility, or you have, you know, basically two different things going on in the same place. And so we gave preference to local government over utility programs. They're likely to implement those through a statute. And so we accepted that comment. So here's another exception to 7.1 or 7.2.1. It allows EUITs essentially to be developed and adopted through ordinance by a local government, as long as they're equivalent or better. That would allow a local government to simply amend the tables and propose a different standard. At that point, though, I must say that, you know, local government would then have to enforce the standard as well. So I don't expect Commerce would enforce a local standard. But we would evaluate their standard and make sure it's as good or better than the state standard. Here's the additional target for more recently built buildings that we reviewed before. It's a subsection of this one. So basically you do this and you do the primary piece of work plus you do this additional target work. Once again, we'll accommodate that through a good tool. There's an edit here to, okay, so this is the list of exceptions to multi-use building target calculation. A simple one, make sure it's single building activity. The next one here is suggestion that, well, so spaces less than 10% of gross floor area are in the, with a building activity that's listed, can combine their floor areas with the floor areas with the building that are similar building activity and similar EUIT. That basically says what the standard thinks similar means with respect to this.
Hey, Chuck.
Yeah.
Holly asked, so do I understand that City of Seattle could adopt lower targets?
Yes, they could. That is true regardless of whether or not we include this edit. And that's because there's nothing in the statute that prevents that. Basically, this is, I don't think, a change in content, just a clarification added to exception to the targets here. How's the level of detail? Is that too fine a detail? I guess we have time. You know, I mean, just minor details. You know, the standard here says for the recent 12 consecutive month period. You'll see this occur a number of times throughout the standard because we've adopted the within 2 years prior to the compliance date as our kind of time frame when that data needs to be collected. We are moving all our tables adopted by the state into a subsection of Annex Z. It'll reduce the amount of editing that we have to do to the base standard later. And then once again, Annex Z will become this relatively standalone Washington state feature. We're only adopting 7.1, 2A, and 3. The rest are different units of measure than we'll be adopting. So let's get to this. This is the first place you see this 8.1.1.1 is the first place you see the alternate approach allowed for campuses simply by incorporating that they may also include in their audit the district heating and cooling systems. It's a setup for what happens in section 9. All right, so in our original, here under energy audits 8.4, our original edit, we had added level 3 audits. As we've discussed in previous meetings, we've chosen not to add level 3 audits. So those have been edited. Now we've included all the content that we think we need from a level 3 audit to do a life cycle cost analysis in Annex X, which we'll get to shortly. So this is just a reorganization. It was based on the way the original standard was written. It didn't make sense. Tacoma provided a good comment that highlighted that, and it was pretty obvious to see once somebody pointed it out. So that's just moving a few things around within the standard. Once again, right here, I'm starting to move people to use normative Annex X for a good number of the features here. So very few changes to section 8. I've highlighted a few of them. Once again, a lot of the things that folks are concerned about that might have been in section 8 and 9 are going to be discussed in the Annex X. So for buildings with energy targets, once again, this is an edit provided to support the university proposal. Implementation of EMs to campus district heating and cooling systems in lieu of EEMs implemented directly to campus buildings is acceptable, provided that the energy audit demonstrates energy savings from the campus district system will be greater than the EEMs identified for the buildings. Energy savings are measures in BTU per year. So I call this efficiency swaps. I want to highlight here that this may allow campuses to kind of resort their priorities as to where they apply efficiency. But it's not going to eliminate the efficiency needed in the buildings eventually. They might get away with it for a compliance period or two, but eventually they're still going to get to their buildings. So that's the strategy they proposed. That's the rationale I'm able to use to say this is a good idea. Any comments on this, let us know. Here's the same language formatted for buildings without energy targets. I bet this was in the previous edit. I just didn't color it correctly. Once again, this is work that gets done in Annex X. I don't think this is new this time either. It's still in red. Sorry we missed that. Basically, it's talks about verification of buildings without metering. Verification is typically based on your metering results, but in this case, it's based on the International Protocol for Measurement and Verification that is commonly used. Section 10, all the residential building is not adopted. A reminder that any residential building that would be covered by this standard is covered by the commercial sections as written in the original standard.
Hey, Chuck, before we move further,
Yeah.
can we just go to the chat box real quick?
Yeah.
Christine asked, do we define campus in this document? Is it only schools or also include hospital campuses?
It could include a hospital campus. Yeah, it is not limited to the university system. Our exception, though, is limited to district heating and cooling systems that are essentially owned and managed by the building owner. So they are for institutional systems. Or, you know, Boeing has a campus that's got their own district heating and cooling system. So, at any rate, the ownership has to be the same as essentially the alignment there.
Amy, thank you. Amy took a quote or the quoted definition from the standard, which is a campus is a collection of buildings and served by a campus, district heating, cooling, water reuse, and or power system owned by the same building owner.
Right, it's ownership. Thanks, Amy. Okay. It's 10:15. Is it time for a break yet, or should I get through Annex X first?
Yes, it's time for a break. It's a 10-minute break. I kind of lost track of time as well. We're going to have another break also at the next hour, so 10-minute break. Should we go for 10:25? We kind of went over 15 minutes. Chuck?
Let's make it a 7.5-minute break.
All right.
Or 7 minutes. Let's see. That's 10:22.
Okay. 10:22.
Sorry, folks. We got some work to do. Okay, just a reminder, we'll be starting up here again in about 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, it's amazing what you can do in 7.5 minutes. I have a cup of coffee, a banana, and a break. Somebody talk, make sure they can hear me.
I can hear you loud and clear. I
All
grabbed
right.
I grabbed a protein shake and some M&Ms, so we're
All
good.
right. Yeah. Something about working close to the kitchen these days makes that all possible. All right, we're continuing through our review of edits made to Standard 100. I'd say we're more than half done with this. We'll keep moving here. Once again, when I believe that a section of Standard 100 is might lead to confusion, I've simply not adopted that section. You'll see that several places. Normative Annex C forms, we've deleted them and added a reference that directs people to Normative Annex Z, where we will have our modified versions of those forms noted. Of course, the climate zone map is important. I've also added notes for things that we didn't modify. So folks, well, maybe it, well, we didn't actually, yeah. So there's some things I didn't include in this draft, or just huge sections of informative information that we're leaving it in, but we're not modifying it at all. Those are adopted without modification. There's a note there. Normative Annex L is your O&M plan. I don't think we changed anything this go around, but remember, this is the instruction set for that's referenced in the required energy management plan. We have provided a few edits to this to emphasize the importance of control strategies. Those are fairly, well, we made those edits some time ago. We did get one comment about documentation. Remaining useful life of building systems and components. That's an important feature of the energy management plan. And so we accepted that comment. Informative Annex M had some, what I thought were kind of confusing guidance on building type definitions. You had to open up CBEX and look for them. We're adopting Portfolio Manager. I do have a little guidance on definitions at the bottom of table 7-1 as adopted by Washington. So I'm ready to move on to Annex X. Any comments before I head off in that direction?
Yes, there's a couple of comments that came in 3.1 definitions, qualified, going back to the meaning of, I'm sorry. In 3.1 definitions, qualified energy auditor, B says an energy auditor, assessor, analyst certified by ASHRAE or AEE. Does the AEE certified energy manager qualify as an auditor, assessor, analyst? CM is in the next term qualified person.
First, I don't know off the top of my head. I think a detailed public comment on that, if I think AEE may have several certifications. One, I don't know. So the way to provide us a good public comment would be to refer to specific AEE certifications. And well, at least give us a link so we can look at those and see what the qualifications are. At any rate, I only responded to the one comment we got, and any tune-ups to those, what I've called the cast of characters. Certainly, it's not too late to make those suggestions. Anything else?
Amy comments, I wonder if retaining informative Annex H is confusing. Other thoughts?
I forget what H is. We could go either way. Perhaps it does, it duplicates our reference to both Annex S and the NIST standard 135, perhaps. We'll consider that.
All right, Tom, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Tom says, as certified energy auditor and CEM are different CEE certifications.
Thanks, Tom.
Roy asks, how will useful life be determined?
Useful life is, for energy audit purposes, is usually determined by using one of the references. ASHRAE has a document on useful life. I think BOMA has probably the best reference document I've seen on that. I think they compiled a number of sources. So that's your useful life with respect to things like energy audits. Now, within the context of the standard, we allow folks to argue for extended useful life so they don't have to, well, it's not so much extended useful life. You know, useful life is basically when when the equipment's expected to fail. Once again, auditor will use one of those reference manuals. If we need a definition, I'd welcome more input on that. I think I will pause and test my memory and see if I already provided a definition. Here we go. Useful life is the expected remaining service life of the building system or equipment used interchangeably with service life. So that's our current definition. If you have comments on that, or if it needs to be used differently in sections of the code, please give us a holler. And of course, for a, you know, new piece of equipment, that useful life is that reference document I provided. All right, let me settle on a page here so folks don't get dizzy. We're going to talk about normative Annex X. I have inserted some general guidance on the application of life cycle cost analysis. It's very general, but it's important for considering cost and benefits, so I included it here. The first paragraph is basically that life cycle cost is an analysis that compares the base case of the existing building with an alternate case. The total life cycle cost of each case are produced by this analysis, but the kind of result that's telling is the incremental difference between those costs and whether or not the alternate case, which is incorporating all your EEMs, saves more money than your base case. So we had a lot of questions about, you know, cost, so I'm trying to cover some of that here in general and more specifically later. You know, the base case includes all costs for energy, operations, maintenance, and other related costs scheduled in the analysis period. So the analysis period is, for the energy audits, is the length of the longest measure analyzed. Now, this can include replacement of existing equipment upon failure with code compliant equipment. So within that study period, if something's going to fail, you know, that first piece of equipment has an end of life, and then the new piece of equipment is substituted within the context of the base case. So the alternate case captures benefits associated with implementation of additional efficiency features. All costs and benefits of implementation of EEMs required by Section 9 should be captured by this analysis. And all costs should be considered. Now, that all costs can be considered is my reaction to folks that had lots of questions about what if I have to shut down a wing of my building in order to implement this? Well, I don't foresee, well, it's rarely that it's cost effective to implement a measure if there is a cost impact of vacating a building or loss of service of your building. Those are costs that are allowed under the standard. So those sorts of kind of extreme cases that folks have provided illustrations to in their comments are certainly covered. The final paragraph is about the extended implementation period allowed by the standard. It allows more, now this is somewhat editorial for a standard, but I thought it was important for people to hear and have here. Extended implementation periods are allowed by this standard. This allows more EEMs to be considered at time of failure, resulting in much of the cost of implementation being attributed to the base case. So if it takes folks a few years to get around to replacing a piece of equipment, and they replace it at time of failure or at end of useful life, rather than an early replacement, all that, the kind of code required replacements are in the base case analysis now. And it ends up, the cost for the alternate is only changes to that code baseline system that provide additional energy use. This is a long used kind of caveat in energy efficiency world. It's how utilities implement programs. So essentially this ultimately reduces the cost of the alternate case and makes it more likely that more EEMs will be cost effective. So now I think that's all was in, everything I've said here is part of the NIST standard. It's included in the context of what we've already essentially written in the previous paragraph, but I thought some narrative to support that would be useful in the standard just to get people on the right track. I do want to respond to a good number of comments we had. Let's see, I'm just got some notes here on other comments we've received. First, I want to start with a reminder that fines, you know, there's still some kind of folks that perhaps haven't been with us the whole way, but I want to repeat some kind of general principles here that I've discussed before. There's still in some people's mind a concept that they must comply with their EUIT or they're going to get fined. That's not true. The standard 100 is a process, and the compliance is based on stepping through the process, which includes adopting cost-effective measures. Folks that are on that path and doing the process should not be concerned about fines to the extent they're getting the job done. And of course, the focus here is to adopt cost-effective measures, including the management and O&M stuff in sections 5 and 6, as well as the cost-effective capital projects. So that's just a reminder I wanted everybody to have, particularly with respect to any discussion we have about fines. We received a good number of comments from folks that they should be able to include the cost of energy audits within the evaluation of their energy efficiency measures. We have not accepted that comment. Energy audits essentially are a sunk cost. By the time you've done the audit and you've actually found cost-effective work to do, and you're about to move into implementation, first, the NIST standard, the ASHRAE standard 211, both emphasize that you don't include those sunk costs in the evaluation of efficiency measures. So we're kind of sticking with that. Now that'll disappoint some of you, but I think we have good documentation to back up that approach. As a counter to that, the other part was people were concerned about costs not covered in Annex X previously. I've tried to emphasize that all costs of implementing Section 9 can be included. And I have added the paragraphs above, as well as some detail on what we're going to get to down below. Previously, this section 5.4.8.1 was referenced but not included here. I've made sure I brought that into our standard. I've done some modifications to provide clarifications folks requested about employee work. Folks were talking about construction management, cost for their business. Certainly those are included, as well as that of work that's contracted for. I want to point out the last bullet here. This is once again right out of Standard 211, that any additional adjustments that significantly impact the cost estimate of the EEMs. I think that's a pretty broad statement. It takes into account a good number of factors that would be incurred under the implementation of Section 9. And all this section in red here comes from Standard 211, 5.4.8. Now, previously we did include well, once again, I included the estimate employee labor in here as asked for by folks. All right, so I think that clarifies cost and benefits, at least to the point where Commerce thinks it's justified within the context of the law. I want to say one more thing about energy audits and, well, what I think we're going to get out of this. And I think because this is a fairly tough cost effectiveness test for measures, it's by no means going to drive you to do things that are super crazy. What I think is going to come out of this with respect to capital project improvements are lighting systems, and I mean full systems, as well as control systems. That can include things like upgrading VAV boxes and such. Control systems have come a long way. We are able, now that there's variable speed motors that are readily available in the VAV boxes, the dampers are better, the controls are better. We're able to achieve huge savings related to control systems and essentially designing systems to go to part load or even turn off when sections of a building aren't occupied or used. That's where we're seeing the mass majority of the savings in the efficiency upgrades that I see. I think the next level of work I think we're going to see accomplished is, well, through energy management planning. The scheduled implementation of new measures, scheduled in concurrence with system upgrades that are made at the time of failure, and upgrades executed in construction with under renovation work. A good energy management plan's gonna prepare folks to be ready to execute on those when those events arise. Those are things that I don't think are typically cost effective through this economic test we proposed. Unless, of course, they're scheduled and implemented. And the standard allows delayed implementation for exactly that reason, so that folks can schedule stuff in. That makes it more cost effective to do and more cost effective to actually do more at those junctures. I'm sure folks have other examples of, the really cost effective stuff that gets implemented, but I just wanted to note that nothing in the standard is going to require you to replace the skin on your building or, change out a recently installed boiler to get an extra few percent savings. They simply wouldn't pass the cost effectiveness test. So now, with respect to how the audit works, the audit is a multi-step audit process. We've designated the level 2 audit as the primary audit, but that includes the level 1. And in the level 1 audit, practitioners, the energy auditor gets to select the measures that proceed to the level 2 audit with limited analysis. And to some extent, those selections are made based on an early idea that there's no way taking the skin off this building is going to be cost effective. So we're not putting that in level 2 audit protocol. This keeps the ultimate lower. Now, of course, they have to be prudent and not be throwing stuff out too early that might prove itself out. But that procedure keeps the cost of its the detailed work to a minimum. Now we took that a step further. We did not adopt the level 3 audit, which I think several engineers say our statute requires. So we've reduced audit costs by not requiring the level 3 audit, and instead including the economic evaluation criteria that the statute references as a standalone feature here in Annex X. At any rate, enough with Chuck's commentary. That was pure commentary, but I thought I wanted to say that in reaction to some of the comments we've received over the months here.
Chuck, do you want to head to the chat box?
Yeah, sure.
All right, we might have to be backtracking, but let me just go back a little bit. I'm not going to read this out loud, but Karen put in on the link where WSU Energy Program publication has a good information on different certifications. So if you want to check that out, check the chat box. Joseph writes, I think then maybe defining the source or basis for determining EUL, subtracting age of equipment to determine RUL would be good. Direction comes from ASHRAE or BOMA doc. I don't know what those acronyms stand for. Chuck, maybe you can clarify.
He's referring me back to the BOMA doc.
Okay.
I made a note, if you have I still encourage written comments. That's, at any rate, thanks for that. I have made a note on that, but if you want to make sure it sticks, written comments are always best.
David comments, the Power Council maintains a useful life table for all measures covered by RTF and by the power plan. Utilities need to use that table for their measures. This reference should be addressed or at least be an item in the references.
So let me ask folks to type. I have a question. Sometimes the RTF is fairly conservative. Are there times when the RTFs measure life is substantially shorter than what we find in the engineering references? At any rate, that would be a consideration, but we can look at the measure life in the RTF tables as well.
Okay. Tom comments, we use the costs to bring the equipment to new operating conditions rather than the full cost to calculate our incremental measure costs. This would preclude that approach.
Say the first part of the sentence.
We use the cost to bring the equipment to new operating conditions rather than the full cost to calculate our incremental measure costs. Tom, you want to unmute? And
yeah, unmute Tom. Let's have him explain that.
Sure, Chuck. When we have a piece of equipment that has a part that fails, and that's honestly what a lot of these do, to be able to pay an incentive on what really needs to be paid, we say to fix this product, you got two choices. Either you have to go buy a new one because of code, or to fix the product, you would pay X amount to do it. If they will give us the cost to fix the equipment, then we are allowed to pay more on the incremental cost that is left, rather than to just say, hey, that none of that exists. And the reason I bring it up is that a lot of what we want to help with as a utility in this law would be to use our incentives to pay some of it so that the rest can go to structural changes that normally wouldn't get paid for. So that's the only reason.
So I like the approach. You know, I don't disagree with the approach at all. I think it kind of goes hand in hand with my comment about, you know, these control system upgrades that happen over time. Could you have a look at our draft and tell us where that needs to be inserted? Because I'm not sure where it lives.
Yeah, I'll take a look at it and see where it might be a subsection of what you've already written.
Right, right. And if we need a new section, let us know. That's certainly a good approach. Now, there is some crossover with section 6 where it's maintenance rather than, you know, this kind of extra work. But I don't want to put any super tight restrictions on that. It's just an acknowledgement that some would happen in the O&M work. All right, thanks for that, Tom. If you provide some detail, that'd be very useful.
Okay, moving on. What important source for useful life determination for public agencies are contained within the Washington State Administrative and Accounting Manual published on OFM? And Norm entered a link there if you're interested.
Okay, I actually helped create that list, and it's right out of the engineering rules that we referenced.
Okay.
Thanks for the link. Oh.
Thank you. Tom also writes, are the EEMs aggregated for cost effectiveness, or does the measure stand alone for CE?
So they're first evaluated on an individual basis. And that's because any individual measure that's not cost effective is not required by the law to be implemented. That conclusion of level 2 audit, you're going to have the individual measure simple payback method applied. And then when you move into the life cycle cost, do both individual measure and bundle measures get evaluated. Once again, because of the clause in the law, any measure that is not cost effective be eliminated. Now, they don't have to be eliminated. A user can choose to install a bundle that they choose to get the work done. More comprehensive projects sometimes have pieces and parts that are desirable, but perhaps on their own don't look cost effective. So that's, and the primary, you know, obviously the bundle is a preferred approach, but I'm respecting the sentence in the law that says building owners can deduct individual measures.
All right. Ted comments, there are a number of references available for useful equipment life, GSA, sorry, it's my alarm for the next break, so right after this. There are a number of references available for useful life. GSA has one as well. My takeaway is that the final rule should adopt one of these resources, ASHRAE, BOMA, Washington State, etc.
Okay. I was thinking all these details could be handled in education and training, but if we need a specific reference, or all of the references, quite frankly, please send them in. Simple email will get it done. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. And the last one, it seems like utility incentives should be a factor in the cost comparison, since the incentives will reduce the payback and make the EEMs more likely to be cost effective.
The law and section X account for that. Cost our net cost, the building owner after utility or government incentives are included in the cost of the project. So those measures do get netted out after, well, the measures are life cycle cost evaluated based on the, you know, the net cost to the building owner.
Okay, it's about that time. Let's take another break. Chuck?
We'll be moving on to administrative XZ when we get back, and then targets. So it's an hour. Once again, break. Let's make 5 minutes this time because we still have a fair amount to cover here.
Okay, let's get back at 11:06. Second.
Luke and Emily, would you like to drive the screen moving forward, or should I keep doing it?
If it's simple enough to switch over, it might be best if I drive.
Right. So let's switch because we have a break here.
Okay.
I will give, well, I think Annika has host. Annika, you want to give that to Luke?
Sure thing.
Luke, do you also have the targets?
I don't. I think Emily must have those.
I'll forward them to you. You
Okay.
can targets, and we won't have to switch again.
Okay.
You should have it, Luke, but I'm going to send you a new copy.
Yeah, you know, I probably did get that yesterday.
This morning, actually, but
Was it? Okay. Thank you.
There's also the I have open.
Okay. You're sending me that as well.
Yep. One package.
Oh, yes.
Luke, are you on the line? Can you hear me okay?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can. Quick time check. We're at 11:06 and going to conclude by 12. So with Annex Z, let's plan to do a quick breeze through major changes
Right.
so we can save time for the targets discussion.
Yep. What time did Annalyn say we're starting up again?
11:06. So we can get going now.
Yeah,
Okay.
right now.
Time to go.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for participating today. I'm going to be talking about administrative procedures of Annex Z, normative Annex Z. Again, this is a new section. We have done workshops on this in the past. We've placed this annex in here to highlight all the administrative procedures for this rule. Up top on the screen here, I've got the table of contents. Like Chuck said earlier in the presentation today, he advises folks to take a look at Annex Z first before they dive into the standard. This table of contents hopefully is a good guide to what the different sections of Annex Z represent. So I'm going to attempt to succinctly go through the changes that have been made to Annex Z since our last workshops on the subject. They're focusing on the substantive changes to the annex. The majority of what we've done is to provide more clarity for the users. So the first section, Z1, is our notification to building owners of covered commercial buildings by the AHJ. And I will start by saying we took comment from folks' previous workshop, and we have since designated all references to department as to AHJ. AHJ is defined within standard 100, and we will be using that consistently throughout the standard to refer to commerce in this case. So again, since Annex Z is a new addition to Standard 100, there are no changes underlined in blue as we have in the other sections of Standard 100. What you'll see in this edit is any changes to Annex Z from our first workshops to today. So we've got them underlined in red. And again, most of them are for clarity, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about that in respect to the time that we had today. So quickly in Z 2.1.2 in notifications, we're talking about correction of errors. We will have a form provided by Commerce that the building owners can fill out if they need to correct errors in the notifications that we send out, such as square footage of conditioned space for covered building. Again, some changes to the reference of department, ASJ, some more clarification. In a lot of instances, we shorten the language up. We have corrected the numbering within this text. Hopefully we got that right. If anybody you see references to different sections that don't line up, please let us know. We are working on the exemptions here. I have moved exemptions previously. In previous workshop, we had all the exemption requirements down at the bottom of Annex Z where the forms lived. I have moved the exemptions description up to Z 4.1 here as a compliance path. So compliance through exemptions is outlined in detail. We're still ironing out some of the specifics. If you have any comments, please let us know in written format, or we can discuss it in question today if you'd like. We have added a reference to Chuck's work on the recently built buildings as an exception. So if we have, and you notice there's been an edit here already where if you have a building constructed less than or more than 3 years prior to the compliance date.
Should probably be less.
But, what's
I don't know why we can't figure that out, but it should.
I know it's confusing for some reason. But... So essentially, if you've got a brand new building, it will not, it can be exempt from this law. Moving on. So after exemptions, we have our general compliance, which is meeting the EUIT. We didn't really make any changes to section Z 4.2. Z 4.3, we had reference to buildings without comprehensive metering previously. Chuck has updated that to reference section 5.2, building energy monitoring. So there have been some clarifications there and reference to more details of what buildings without comprehensive metering actually looks like. We have also struck the reference to level 3 energy audits and reference to the normative Annex X. So instead of requirement for a level 3 audit, it's a level 2 audit with a investment criteria based on normative Annex X. So that is going to apply to any building that don't meet the EUIT on their own, those that are pursuing the economic investment criteria. So that could be through conditional compliance. It could be through just general investment criteria in meeting the EUIT. Again, this is just additional information for the different compliance paths. Chuck's also updated the phased implementation language to reference Annex X in the investment criteria. This is kind of repeated information for each of those sections. We've added to this table, this reference table that will not be included in the rule itself, but is here for informational purposes. Okay, notice of violations. So we have made some significant editorial changes to this section based on advice we've gotten from the Attorney General's office. So we've clarified information. We really haven't changed the actual fee structure and timelines that are associated with those fee structures. But we have improved the language to be more clear and provide the best guidance possible. And one thing we've done is we've reduced our notices from 3 notices to 2 notices. The first notice is actually allowing a grace period of no less than 7 days to make correction to any notice of non-compliance. So if building owners receive a notice of non-compliance from the ASHRAE, it will be received after their scheduled compliance date. This notice will specify the time by which the building owner must cure the violation. And you can see here, there are 4 different potential violations: failure to submit a compliance report, failure to meet an energy use intensity target or receive conditional compliance, failure to provide accurate reporting, or failure to provide a valid exemption certificate. So building owners that we have identified to meet one of those criteria will receive a notice of violation and opportunity to correct. So they'll have a minimum of 7 days to correct any errors in that notice. That is not the case. They will receive a second notice. At this point, we will direct them to an application for an exemption, if that applies, a mitigation plan, if they plan to meet the requirements of this law, or they can submit an intent to pay the penalties. And lastly, they can request for an administrative proceedings to challenge or mitigate the penalty. So the structure of the penalties, as far as has not changed. We didn't make any changes to the actual penalty amount or time frame. It's still going to be, for those that are going to mitigate the penalty, it's 20 cents per square foot per year plus 30% of $5,000 flat fee. If they elect just to pay the penalty, its penalty is $5,000 plus $1 per square foot per year. If they pay that penalty within 180 days of receiving the notice, the fee is capped at that $1 per square foot per year plus the 5,000 flat fee. If they don't pay within, really what it turns out to be is the first year, the penalties continue into the second and third. So they're reenacted into the second and third and subsequent years until you reach the next cycle date. And those penalties, of course, are cumulative over the subsequent years. The ASHRAE may by rule increase the penalty rates to adjust for the effects of inflation. This is not a new addition. This is just, we moved it from one section to another. Talks about the payment in 180 days, as mentioned previously. Interest will accrue on civil penalties pursuant with the RCW and when the debt becomes past due. Reference to the change of section numbers. There is some new language here from the advice we've got from the Attorney General's office to include all the legal requirements associated with administrative penalties. I'm not going to go into detail of those at this point. But that moves us on to the mitigation plan of noncompliance. So again, building owners notified of noncompliance will have 4 options. They can mitigate noncompliance, they can pay the penalty, they can appeal, or they can submit an application for exemption. So the mitigation plan really isn't anything different than general compliance requirements. Now keep in mind, complying with the law after the initial due date will incur a penalty, or you might say a late fee, based on the time between the initial compliance date and the approved compliance period. So that may be conditional compliance, or it may be compliance with the EUIT. And again, there is a grace period with the minimum of 7 days after the compliance date, or after you have notice of non-compliance, to correct errors before these penalties start to accrue. Some details about requesting a hearing. These recommendations came from Attorney General's office, changes from 30 days or from 60 days to 30 days. More new language associated with the RCWs and the legality of how these appeals are enforced. As Chuck spoke of before, all forms from Annex C, we should probably change that to Annex Z, will be moved from Annex C, because we're not adopting those forms, to Annex Z. So forms A, B, C, D, E, F, and G will now be in Annex Z. We've spoken of all these in the past. So in review, Form A is our general compliance, the standard 100. This form will be provided by the AHJ, and will be required to be submitted by the initial compliance date to avoid penalty. Form B is our EUIT. So determining your EUIT is through Form B. So every building will have its unique EUIT. And Form C is our actual building's energy use intensity calculation. Again, this will be done through Portfolio Manager. And we will have the details in Annex Z of this process. These are all, this form here kind of shows the matrix of data that Portfolio Manager will provide. Everything with an X in the last column is information that we will receive from Portfolio Manager about your building. So building owners will have to create an account with Portfolio Manager, Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and they will have a specific identification to Washington State. And
Luke, if I could make
yeah.
a quick note, we did receive several comments about weather normalization procedures. And the simple answer to that is we're adopting the weather normalization feature in Energy Star.
Great, thanks for that detail. Forms D and E, we haven't added anything to this. But these forms are for your audit and your energy audit and implementation. Annex X, an evaluation tool. That is a form that we are going to provide. There is Form F for buildings to document their historic significance, if that's the case. And Form G is the application for exemption certificates. So the majority of this information was moved up to Z 4.1. The different compliance paths are outlined, but we will have a form that allows you to report your exemption. There will be additional documentation that building owners will have to enclose and send into the AHJ in order to document their claim of exemption. And that's it for Annex Z. We will have the tables, the EUI targets in Annex Z. And Emily's going to speak of those in a minute, and we will show you those tables. Any questions, Adeline?
Right now, no, but let's just give people a moment to process the information you gave. All right, it looks like nothing is coming through the chat. Guess we can move on and go back to it later.
Okay.
Luke, will you be presenting the targets?
I think Emily was going to do that. Is that right, Emily?
Should we give the presenter to Emily? Oh,
If I'm going to present, I need a minute to pull up documents.
You know, I could drive through this if you wanted to.
Okay, and then question for Chuck. Chuck, do you want to start with the 2050 SBW memo and provide an overview, or do you want to start with the targets table?
I can talk about the memo. Now, I have to say I lost my connection, so I'm on the phone now.
okay. We have a question that came in while everybody's trying to get set up. Luke, is there any form that references the O&M plan?
There is no form. There is an informative Annex L within Standard 100 that details what the content of an O&M plan would look like. Again, this is an informative annex, not normative, so it's not required. It's informational.
Let me add comment on that. I have intentionally not detailed O&M beyond what's in the standard, simply because there's a lot of O&M plans already in existence. There are software packages that assist people with O&M that produce summary reports. And so I think it's advisable to continue to allow people to use the systems they've already set up. Now, you know, they'll need to review their system and make sure it basically covers the scope of what's in Section 6 and Annex L. But we're not going to create a form for that or provide a lot of specific direction.
Holly adds that the ASHRAE has guidelines on O&M manuals.
Thanks, Chuck. Any other questions, Annalyn?
No, Karen, just wanted to announce that you might have received a survey, a survey link from WSU regarding this, the building standards. So if you received it, if you could take a moment to fill it out. Are you presenting or is Emily presenting
I think Chuck, are
the targets?
you going to talk about the memo? Are you able to do that with your connection?
I'm assuming he can't because he's not on right now.
Uh-oh.
Chuck is on the phone.
I'm on the phone. You know, if somebody could just pull up the 2050 memo. I think I'm about back on here, but let's see.
I've got it
Yeah.
up. I've got it up.
Okay,
Okay.
we'll keep you as the presenter, Luke.
So Luke, we can only see a gray screen on our end. It's probably because you've hit the share PowerPoint and not the Word document or PDF. If you go back down into the share content, you should be able to present that particular document.
Okay.
Be able to see it.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, I see it. Thanks, Luke.
Yep. Thanks, Austin.
Okay, so I think you folks all know the part of target setting where, you know, we requested that SCW do the research to arrive at a mean value for energy targets. The state statute says we can be no higher than mean, which gives us flexibility to go lower should we be able to provide a reasonable justification to do so. I had a good number of thoughts on this with respect to the targets that are mean and how they were developed. And the primary thing we're examining in this particular report is the efficiency gap between, say, 2005 or 6, when a lot of the data began being collected for this, for the SDW mean setting work.
Hey, Chuck, sorry to interrupt. Can you switch audio real quick? Because your phone sounds a little staticky.
Okay.
Okay,
I'm
that's
back
better.
online. Is the audio good now?
That's way better. Thank you.
All right. Good move. All right. So, you know, the EUIT mean setting relied on a range of data vintages, a good deal of it from studies released in 2009 and 2012, which typically are for data gathered prior to those dates. They did incorporate a little bit of more recent data. There is some 2013 data as well as some 2019. I may not get those dates exactly correct, but that's essentially the data set that was used to arrive at mean. And a good deal of that data, once again, is 10 years old, a whole bunch of it. And my question back to some of our analysts, mostly Poppy Storm and Dave Balon, was, you know, we've done a great deal of efficiency work in that time frame that is already baked into our building stock. First of all, a lot of these buildings that were examined don't have LED lighting at the time of the implementation. That's a very substantial energy savings. It could be 8 to 15 or 20 EUI, depending on the building type. Buildings have been renovated over that time frame, and renovation leads to implementation of energy code lighting standards, energy code HVAC standards. And some of those requirements can be substantially better than vintage equipment are replaced. So there's a good stock of buildings out in the marketplace that over the last 10 or 12 years would have adopted more efficient measures. And that work continues from now until, the compliance dates come up. Now, there is also comments from City of Seattle where they demonstrated that the EUIs of buildings in their data set, if you just took the contemporary data set that they have, would be much lower. Now, a lot of that's summarized here in this memo from the 2050 Institute. And I'm not going to go through the memo here today, but it is the basis for decisions we made relative to target setting. So Luke, why don't you shift over to the target memo?
The target tables, you mean, Chuck?
Yeah, the tables. Emily, you want to take this or should I?
No, I'm happy to take it. Just wanted to make a quick note for everybody on the line. The memo that Luke was just presenting is now posted on the Clean Buildings webpage along with the target tables that we're going to walk through. So just want to make sure everybody knows they have access to that.
All right. Emily, can you see this, or folks?
No, we've got a gray box. So we need to switch to the Word document from the PDF.
All right. I've got the Word document open. You still can't see it?
We see it now.
No,
Can you make it a little larger?
Yep.
Thank you. Sorry, Emily. What were you saying?
No problem. No problem. All right. So what we're seeing on Luke's screen right now is table 7-1, which is a summary of the building activity types. As mentioned, we are using building types from Portfolio Manager. We're hoping that creates some alignment and some administrative ease. So you can see that mapping of Portfolio Manager building types and subtypes listed as well. I don't believe there's anything new in this table. So Luke, let's go ahead and scroll down.
Let's go to the bottom of this table. I do want to point out one added feature. I have added a footnote relative to definitions for all these space types. Basically refers folks back to Portfolio Manager definitions. I have added one definition because it is not written in mandatory language in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, so I took their definition and modified it. Now, a data center is not a space with a target. But when it comes time to defining the gross floor area, that essentially becomes exempt through our multi-building calculation exemptions. We wanted to be very specific about what's a data center, how you measure the floor area of the data center, and what isn't a data center. A data closet is not a data center. Now, this is essentially simply the definition from Energy Star Portfolio Manager, but it's written in somewhat more mandatory language. At any rate, that's the only change essentially to the content of this table. And I think it's useful in that folks know that, well, we all have a clear definition for all these building types now. All right, Emily, next.
Thanks, Chuck. All right, so now Luke is presenting table 7-2A, which is what we are proposing as the targets for the 2 climate zones, 4C and 5B here in the state of Washington. What you're seeing on just to the right of the center of the page is what we determined to be the mean EUI by building type for the 2 different climate zones. And then if you move 2 columns to the right, you'll see the proposed targets that we are putting forward for 4C and 5B. A summary of what we are looking at here is a 15% reduction in EUI, which would be the target, and that's a 15% reduction over the mean. What we observed as we went through the building types is that there were a number of building types and uses that had energy loads that we determined to be a bit more difficult to connect with the current technology and practices that Chuck had just outlined. One example of this was food service and restaurants. It would be more difficult to attain those reductions through just lighting upgrades and O&M alone because there's large loads for cooking, for ventilation, for refrigeration, et cetera. So that's just one example. So our approach to that is that any of the building types that had a mean over 200 EUI, we capped the reduction at 30 EUI. So in other words, if the EUI mean for a building type was 300, instead of having a 15% reduction, we just said we will drop the EUI by 30. So in that scenario, the 300 EUI building, the target would be 270. So anything over that 200 EUI threshold, again, converted to the drop of 30 in EUI. How did I do explaining that? What do you want to add? Chuck, Luke?
I think you got it right. I think because we have a lot of healthcare folks participating, that cap also of 30 applied to a good amount of the more intensive healthcare and lab facilities. So it's really the energy intensive buildings that are likely energy intensive, for reasons other than the ones we've talked about.
All right, and looks like we got a comment or a question from Brian. To echo back, if I understand correctly, the EUI targets are 15% below mean up to a cap of 30 kBTU per square foot. And that's correct, Brian. All right, Chuck, any other notes you want to make on table 7-2?
I think it's that simple. Now these tables do get quite long because of the way Portfolio Manager categorizes things. We wanted to make sure that people, when applying for Portfolio Manager, could find their reference building through, at any rate, through you know, by the reference, I found some duplicates that were easy to eliminate. We might do a little more of that, but we won't cut out any building types that are unique, certainly.
So Chuck, we've got a question in the chat box that I'm wondering if you want to take, or I know we've got Poppy on the line as well. Jeff Glass asked, how was an EUI mean established for a building type that was not included with CBEX or CBSA, like ambulatory surgery centers?
I saw Santiago on the call. Perhaps he can talk to us.
Santiago, do you want to field that question?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I can address it briefly. Ambulatory surgery centers are not strictly listed as a specific type, but I believe that they fall under one of the healthcare subtypes. I'm just trying to think specifically which one, but it might be covered as a combination of inpatient or outpatient care, kind of depending on like what services are provided. So it might not be just one type depending on the kind of services that are offered, but you could argue that it's a combination of some of these healthcare types. Like I think hospital would maybe cover some of it. It just depends on your combination here, but if it's not explicitly listed, you can consider the services provided for each of these subtypes and build up, you know, something that suits you properly, or you might find that one of these general categories fits you correctly too. Does that kind of answer the question?
Well, what I heard is perhaps we need to look at the definitions and provide some clarity there.
All right, we've got another question from Beth. I thought I heard the cap of 30 is only applied to buildings with a mean over 200 EUI, but is that for all? And Beth, I'm not sure I understand your question, but do you want to clarify the cap of 30 is applied to buildings with a mean over 200 EUI?
Yeah,
I'm not sure about the second part of your question.
I was following up on Brian Russo's comment that it would be 15% below with a cap of 30, but I think I'd heard that if the mean was above 200, then the cap of 30 EUI, or the target would be 30 EUI points lower. Maybe I just heard something wrong.
No, that's okay. Beth, let's go through an example based on what we see on the screen here. So under, let me see if I can find a good example.
I think you're looking at one.
Oh, yeah.
General Medical and Surgical Hospital.
Yep. So we've got a couple examples up here on the screen. We've got, let's use, for example, the food sales and service wholesale club supercenter. The EUI mean in climate 4B is 80. So sliding over 2 columns, 68 is what we're proposing as the target, which is a 15% reduction. Under healthcare, we've got hospital, general medical, and surgical, and you'll see the EUI mean is 226. Luke's hovering his cursor over there. Because that was over the 200 EUI threshold, what we did is just simply deducted 30 EUI off of the mean. So the result there is 196 for the target. Beth, does that clarify your question?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks.
Okay. Examples are always helpful. Okay, and just a couple notes on the target setting process. I want to acknowledge that we received many comments from you that really ranged the whole spectrum of what we expected to hear. We landed on this proposed approach moving forward, which we felt like was a reasonable compromise given our authority that we have listed in statute and recognizing the current technologies and practices in the marketplace and wanting to set ourselves on a reasonable path and a first step forward in achieving our statewide greenhouse gas emissions reductions goals as well. So we invite your comments, your thoughts. We're going to have the comment period open for 2 weeks. So the comment period will conclude on July 23rd, and we invite thoughts and comments. Please submit them to our email address. And I believe we do have one more table, Luke, correct? Luke, while we're there, I'm wondering, Chuck or Santiago, do you want to make any notes about the notes at the bottom of table 7-2A?
I think Santiago would be best, and yeah, just some general comments on those.
Certainly. So most of these notes are just about types not being explicitly eligible. Portfolio manager includes a number of building types which are not covered under these rules. So we're highlighting those specifically, but also there's a number of types which are eligible but are, you know, in requiring a specific approach. So mixed use buildings, for example, aren't a category all of their own, but you may use a combined weighted EUI approach to calculate some of those. So we explicitly call those out, and we're highlighting a few of these areas where there's some vagueness in the definitions, and we're highlighting that caution should be used for settling on a type. You know, it's typically pretty clear, but sometimes some additional guidance may be needed.
Thanks, Santiago.
So Emily, we have one dangling discussion item. And Luke, if you go to the last set of tables, we are presenting here our modified building occupancy shifts normalization factor. The dangling point is we have chosen not to adopt any additional normalization factors. And there are two reasons for that. First of all, the SBW work that you saw presented earlier was the best work possible with the given data, but it was by no means conclusive. And second, buildings with very high energy use, folks that exceed these targets, regardless of, you know, their occupancy, density, and such, are good candidates for energy efficiency measures. And they can be proven out to be good buildings quite quickly through a very preliminary energy audit. So we are not going to include additional normalization factors at this time.
All right, thanks, Chuck. I think we have gotten through everything we were hoping to get through. Is that correct, team?
Just in time.
with just a couple minutes to spare.
Emily, do you want to address those questions that you didn't get to address in the chat box, or?
I think I already have, Annalyn, unless there was one that we missed. We got Jeff's, we got Beth's.
The one from Sandra, Amy. And Beth. I don't know, maybe my mind wandered.
Thank you.
Did you scroll down?
I had not seen that. Thank you. Do you want to ask those, Annalyn?
All right, here we go. Ted asks, is laboratory space covered in this building type list, especially research labs prevalent in Seattle?
I think further down, he answered his own question. He looked it up.
Oh, okay.
It's hard to find, but it's in there.
Okay. Jeff states, also clinic and medical office and portfolio manager are almost identical definitions. Sandra says, the justification for why targets are lower than the means makes good sense. I'm wondering if you could discuss a bit more on the basis for 15% versus say 10 or 20%.
Based on the paper provided, the identified improvements over time were quite high, particularly some building types. Certainly they all exceed the 15% or 30% that we chose. And subsequently we took what we thought was a modest approach. Now, some people will ask, why didn't we go higher? And some people will ask, why didn't we go lower? But that's our kind of reasoned approach.
Okay. Amy states, I think it would be useful to walk through a few scenarios as well in how a building owner would work. Doesn't have to be now, but in some educational material as part of soliciting comments. If you are a building that is a few off your EUI target, you're a building that is newer or in between your new EUIT and your building EUIT, you're below EUIT, etc. So Nicole agrees with Amy. Flowcharts for different scenarios would be helpful educational pieces for people to comment on.
First, WSU is going to be working on educational materials. It's going to be time consuming. It won't be ready right away, but yes, we'll have a supported program with education, the sorts of flow charts you're probably talking about, things like that. In response to Amy's comment about what if you're only a few points over, stuff like that, we quite frankly think that's largely addressed by the fact that folks have 6 or 8 years to get engaged and either meet their target or not, and to provide some other relief past the compliance date, other than all the relief we've already provided within the context of extended implementation periods and conditional compliance that allows you to verify after the compliance date. You know, we think that kind of being less certain about the target and the actual timing of the target is not advised.
Okay, we're at the hour. Emily, do you want to continue, or how would you like to proceed?
We are at the hour, so I feel compelled to honor everybody's time and close out the webinar. There are a few unanswered questions that we'll make sure we provide some information and circle back around about. A couple quick notes. This is our last rulemaking workshop, pre-rulemaking workshop. Comment period is open through July 23rd. We are shooting to file our Code Revisor Form 102 in August. There will be public hearing in September, publishing the CR 103 form in October, and then rules will publish in November. We still have a lot of work to do with program development. We have some great questions and recommendations around customer support. There's going to be a work group or steering committee that'll be led by the WSU Energy Program to develop those materials and that approach. Karen did send out a survey recently. We also are going to be working to solicit input and have workshops around the incentive program development as well. So stay tuned, check the building's webpage for more information, and we'll continue to send out updates through our email distribution as well. So thank you so much for your time, everybody.